Welcome to you all, wherever you may be watching or listening to this. I've been interviewing leading figures in the world of IP over the last few months, and we've had some wonderful and interesting conversations. Up to now, I have been looking outside my own firm for subjects, and I suppose technically the same could be said of my next guest, but he has very much been part of the fabric of our firm for the last 40 years until his retirement at the end of 2020. Rob MacDonald is a legend in the IP world, head of the Gowling's IP team for so many years, but also involved to the full extent in the business of IP through Inter, Marks, and other organizations. To me, of course, he's also a great friend and colleague, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to let him off lightly as we seek to learn more about Rob's remarkable career. So welcome, Rob MacDonald.
Thank you, Gordon. It's great to be here.
Good. Okay, well, let's get started right at the beginning. Rob, where did it all start? Tell us about how you got into law in the first place.
You know what? I wish I could say it was very linear and very planned, Gordon, but of course I can't. I did an undergrad degree in political science, got interested in constitutional law, and decided I would make the jump into law school. I did have as an inspiration my father, who was a lawyer in the military for his career. So the law wasn't entirely new to me. I went to law school. I really enjoyed law school, but I will tell you this: when I graduated from law school, Gordon, I had no clue what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to get called to the bar. I knew I needed that credential, but beyond that, no clue. So I started articling at Gowling and Henderson, June 15, 1981, and basically fell into a career in intellectual property, which I thought this could be fun for a few years. And 40 years later, here I am.
Well, indeed, yes, I know the feeling. I think we're quite parallel in that regard. So, yeah. Gowling and Henderson, can you remember your first day there? And what made the biggest impression on you?
I can remember my first day there. The first day stands out because the first day I sat in the reception on the 14th floor of 160 Elgin Street with classmates of mine who were all starting to article together. Ron Lunau, Wayne Bryanart, Terry McEwen, myself, Bernie Roach. And we were all sitting there, anxiously waiting and having no idea what we were getting into. But that first day still stands out in my mind because we were welcomed, we were made to feel entirely at home and part of the fabric of the firm from the very first day. And to my mind, and you and I have talked about this many times, Gordon, it was that sort of a feeling of belonging, that sort of integration right off the bat, which defined the firm for me then and still defines the firm for me now as being just that great place to be, a great place to work.
It's so important, isn't it, that first impression that a firm makes on you? As you said, it can stay with you forever.
Yeah, exactly.
So the one thing I know about your early days at Gowling and Henderson, and you talked about, sitting in the office. The office you were sitting in was 160 Elgin Street, Ottawa. And what this means is that not only have you spent your entire career at one firm, you've actually spent it in one building. That's right. Did you ever feel like spreading your wings?
You know what? I think it's truly remarkable in the practice of law today to have spent your entire career with one firm. You and I have done that. But to have spent your entire career in the same building just sort of really highlights how boring a person I actually am. I started out on the 14th floor. I worked on the 12th floor. I went to the 27th floor. I went to the 23rd floor. I went to the 27th floor again. I was on the west wall, the north wall, the east wall, the south wall, and then back to the north wall. So I've moved around in the building, but one of the great things about my career at Gowling's is from the very first day, I was traveling. I was going down to our Toronto office to work there, and as we expanded, I got to spend time in all of our Canadian offices. Montreal and Calgary and Vancouver and Waterloo and Hamilton. And so it never seemed like I was in one place, right? Just sitting at 160 Elgin Street. Because wasn't. For what I wanted to do, and as I got into intellectual property, I really enjoyed it and wanted to do it. It was the best place to be, right? The best people to practice with, the best clients. So spreading my wings and going somewhere, no, I was happy. Still look back and think, wow, what an amazing opportunity I had.
Yeah, I mean, you can't always tell, can you, when the door opens for you at the beginning of something like this, where it's going to lead.
Well, you can't, and I got to tell you, Gordon, you will remember David Clark, who was
yes, very well
in our firm, and who unfortunately passed away this past year. David, when I articled, came to me one day because as I said, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and in fact I thought about going out to Halifax to practice law in Halifax. And David was from Halifax, and he came to see me. We had a conversation. He said, "Look, you're being foolish. I want you to come with me. I want you to meet Graham McClanahan, QC, and I think the two of you should work together." And so I went with him, and I met Graham for the first time. And I think Graham was just as taken aback by the conversation as I was. And we talked, and the smartest decision I ever made was when Graham said, "Well, do you want to work with me?" I said, "Sure." And it was great. I had no idea what I was getting into, still no idea, Gordon, but boy, oh boy, brilliant decision.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, like you, I fell into IP. And I'm so grateful that I did. You know, it was just one of those complete happenstance, but there it is, and then it defines your entire life from then on in. Exactly. I want to come back to the great Gordon Henderson later, actually, in our second session. But I mean, you mentioned Graham there and David Clark. Are there any other big names from Gowlings in those days that had a particular influence on you?
Well, I worked very closely with Graham right from the outset, and learned a lot from him as a mentor. He was amazing, and as somebody who gave me the full opportunity. He would just come into my office and say, "Here's a case. I want you to go argue it. You can't win." But go have fun. Go cut your teeth on this case. And he was excellent from that perspective. There were others. I mean, there was Alex Macklin, who was one of the senior patent litigators at the time. There was Gordon Henderson, and Gordon was an IP litigator amongst many other things. I only got to go to court with Gordon once, and I was I still remember there was Gordon Henderson on his feet, who would turn to Jane Steinberg and ask Jane to provide him with whatever he needed next, and Jane would turn to me and I'd provide Jane with whatever Gordon needed next, and it was just so exciting to be there with Gordon Henderson on a very small matter, but very exciting to say, yeah, I was in court with Gordon, and then of course I got to meet and start develop relationships with a lot of sort of the next generation people. Scott Jolliffe, jumps to mind right away. Going to court with Scott back in the days, so it was just a great learning opportunity.
So you mentioned the fact that you weren't really trapped in Ottawa because you were moving around, the other cities where Gowlings had offices in Canada. But of course, quite early on in all of this, you started to cast your mind towards Russia. Now, what were the drivers behind that idea? What made you think of opening up in Russia?
I wish I could take any credit for our decision to open up in Russia, but I can't. I do remember because I was a partner when we voted to open our office in Moscow. But we decided to open the office in Moscow before the fall of the USSR. It was still the USSR, and one of our partners, Ed Belobaba, who's now a justice of the Ontario Court, was doing a lot of work representing Canadian companies, Canadian joint ventures going into the USSR to do business at the time during Perestroika and Glasnost. And we'd been encouraged to open up an office in Moscow, and we did. A very small sort of hole in the wall, but we did it just in time for the end of the USSR. And so we found ourselves with an office in Moscow, and the joint venture work dying up quickly, but a real need and demand for intellectual property services, because if you had a USSR patent, you had to re-register it throughout the countries of the former Soviet Union. The same with trademarks, and those clients that knew us for our IP experience in Canada saw Moscow on our letterhead and would call and say, "Is that Moscow, Ontario, or is that Moscow, Russia?" And so, we hired Vladimir Dementiev, who was patent attorney 001 in the Russian Federation. We hired Tamara Istomina, who was one of the first trademark attorneys in the Russian Federation, and we established that office. And I will tell you this. I remember Graham McClenahan coming to my office. He'd just come out of an executive committee meeting, and he passed me the Russian Patent Act. He said, "You better read this, because you're going to be spending some time in Russia." And I thought, I don't know what's happening here, but okay.
So what was it like? What was it like being in Russia in that? You said we're in the Gorbachev era now, just post perestroika. What was it like?
My first trip was to Russia. So the Gorbachev era had ended. Yeltsin was the president of Russia. My first trip was in 1994, and I will tell you that I was not. It was a hard place to visit. The years prior to 94, so 92, 93, were hard years in Russia, hard for a lot of reasons. And even when I was there, I came out of Russia, I'd lost weight. My wife, Claire, looked at me and said, "What happened to you?" There was no food, or it was very hard to get food. And so when I left Russia on that visit, I wasn't keen to go back. And then my next visit was in 1996. I'd been at the Marx conference in Stockholm, and then flew into Russia. And I remember landing and thinking, "Why am I here? What am I doing?" And just blown away by the change that occurred in the 2 years, and very excited about what we're doing and where we're going. So that was the real transition point for me. And then from there on, over the next 12 years, I spent a lot of time in Russia, and saw that office grow, saw the business grow, and got very firmly founded as one of the leading IP practices in Russia. So very exciting, very exciting.
Well, which it still is to this day, isn't it? And goes on growing. So it's been a fantastic success story. So we're going to come back to the international merger in the second session, but during your earlier years, the firm was growing dramatically in Canada. So what was it like integrating quite a number of pretty big mergers within Canada?
Well, you've gone through this in the UK as well. I was part of the executive committee in the late 90s into the 2000s when we started on a path to expand. We'd already set up an office in Vancouver, but it hadn't really sort of met its full potential yet. By that I mean we knew we had to continue to grow it. We weren't in Calgary, we weren't in Montreal, and we knew we needed to grow in Toronto. And I will tell you, there were a couple of things that I remember very much about those discussions. And one was, and Scott Jolliffe was our chairman at the time. One was the need to have a vision of where you're going and why you're doing it. Right. It's no good saying, "Hey, we just want to grow for the sake of growth." You've got to have a reason and a rationale. And we did. We wanted to be where corporate Canada was growing, and that was Calgary. A lot of head offices moving to Alberta, Montreal, and Toronto. The second thing is that finding the right merger partner is actually difficult. First of all, you've got to find somebody who's interested in doing this, and you've got to explain to them and get them on side with what you're trying to do, get them excited about what you're trying to do. But the big thing is making sure that the cultures of the firm click. And it's sort of funny to sit here and think about a firm having a culture, but and I know that a firm does have a culture. And if you're going to merge, you've got to make sure that there's a cultural fit. And you spend a lot of time trying to get to know the firms and make sure that there is a cultural fit. And then obviously there's the negotiation of the deal and getting to that, the ultimate vote. And then the big third step is integration. And that's massive. So I had the privilege of being at the table as we went down these paths. And the end result, I think, is a fantastic Canadian presence. You can go to our Montreal office or our Vancouver office, and you'll encounter the same Gowling WLG ethos and spirit wherever you go. And then obviously Russia and now, and we'll talk about this in a moment, the expansion internationally. So well, indeed, great fun, great challenge.
I'm going to come back to that a little, later on, probably in our second session. But it's very interesting, what you said there about culture rings a lot of bells, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next session. So let's go back to your actual working life. Then you've been involved in a lot of cases over the years. Is there one that stands out, and which is your biggest source of pride, the one that makes you glow a little bit when you think about it, when you look back at your career?
There are actually a couple of cases where I can look back and say that was fun. That was a learning experience. I'll give you two and very quickly. One was the very first time I went to court all by myself. It was a case that Graham had given to me and said, "You're not going to win this, so go have fun with it." I was up against the Attorney General of Canada. I was the appellant. I was gowned and it was all very sort of special. And I was going through my argument, and I had a throwaway argument. At least I thought it was a throwaway argument. And the judge stopped me and said, you made a good point. And he turned to counsel for the Attorney General and said, "What do you think?" And the counsel for the Attorney General said, "I think he's made a good point." And the judge said, "Well, what do I do?" And counsel for the Attorney General said, "I think you have to allow his appeal," which he did from the bench. And I went back to the office, and I went into Graham's office, and Graham said, "Well, how did it go?" And I said, "I won." And he said, "How?" And I said, "I'm not sure. I'm really not sure, but I won." And you know what? That first case, that first opportunity, resonates with me because it was Graham giving me that opportunity. It was the opportunity to go in and engage in a philosophical legal debate with the judge on the other side, and by chance winning it. The other case I'll mention was Graham was off. He'd been retained as lead counsel on a major patent trial. I think it was a 5-week patent trial. And he called me down at the end of the third or fourth week, called me up and said, "Could you come down for the weekend and help write the submissions for this case?" And so I went down, and I was a kid. I was like, I had no idea what the case was about. I'd never read a patent, and it was a patent trial. And I remember just the collegiality of sitting in the office every day. I would take what they gave me, I would work it into the draft submissions. The team would come back from court that night. We would work late into the night on the submissions, and they would feed in what had happened that day. And by the end of the week, we had wonderful submissions, and we won at trial. Now we lost on appeal, but I to this day I would say that we lost on appeal because I wasn't engaged to write the submission. That's my position. But there you are. So those cases stand out. But there's lots of cases that stand out. And actually, what stands out in my mind is not so much the case, but the people I was there with. Right. And a lot of the cases back in the day, James Buchan and I were litigating together. And a lot of the cases I litigated, the people on the other side still stand out, and some good, some bad, most good, actually. It's a very collegial bar.
It does. It is always the people, isn't it, that really stick in your mind after the event. Now, I've given you a chance to tell us how wonderful you were, which you've duly done. You did a lot of court work. I can't believe that you can't recall any moments which you wish had gone a little bit differently. So come on, I'm sure you can tell us now.
I can. There are always, there are cases that, look, I will tell you this. Every time I come out of court, and I don't think I'm any different than anyone else. You come out of court and you think, I could have done something differently. I could have made my submissions slightly over here, or I could have responded to the judge a little bit better. And so I think everything is a learning moment. Can I look back and say, wow, there was one that I just really blew and I wish I'd done it differently? I'm sure opposing counsel might be able to tell us that, but no. I do want to tell you, though, one of the things I learned that that has stuck with me throughout my career is the importance of having a reputation, the importance of knowing your opposing counsel, the ability to call up and say, listen, we need to talk about something. We need to figure out how we're going to do something, or we need to talk about settlement or whatever, and have the credibility with the other side that they think, I can have that sort of conversation with Rob because I have confidence in him. I do remember being handed a case years and years and years ago, which was a bit of a disaster, and we were behind the 8 ball, and the Associate Chief Justice was going to have a conference call with counsel to read us, i.e. me, the Riot Act. And I called up opposing counsel, and I've reminded him of this since, but he doesn't recall it. I called him up and I said, look, we have to figure this out. Here is what I'm proposing. He said, I like that, but I'm going to have one more qualifier on it. I said, fine, I agree to your qualifier. We got on the phone with the Associate Chief Justice. We told him we had agreed on X, Y, and Z, and the Associate Chief Justice kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. When is opposing counsel going to ask me to hammer Mr. MacDonald? And opposing counsel didn't. He said, no, we have resolved everything that needs to be resolved. Let's move forward. And it's that sort of collegiality and confidence and trust with your opposing counsel that is critical. It helps you serve your client's interests best. My first lesson in collegiality, though, I will tell you, I was in the Court of Appeal for the first time, Federal Court of Appeal, on a case involving pharmaceuticals, which is never, those are fairly hard fought cases. And opposing counsel, Malcolm Johnson QC, a Scot, who I don't think I'd ever met, but certainly I'd talked to on the phone before this. No, I must have met him. But Malcolm was the appellant, representing the appellant, and he stood up and he argued, and he was getting beaten up by the court. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, he sat down. He said, you've heard my submissions, and he sat down. And like the eager little kid that I was, I grabbed my books, I jumped up to the podium, ready to go, and the judge growled something at me, which I assumed meant just stay calm, we'll get to you when we get to you. And he was busy writing and doing whatever. And then he looked up at me again and he said, I told you, Mr. MacDonald, sit down. I don't need to hear from you. And I had no idea what that meant. I know now that that's a good thing, but then I had no idea. So I sort of slunk back to my chair and sat down. They read out the decision from the bench. I won. Malcolm stood up, and he was about 6'5", so when he stood up, it was quite the sight. And he said, thank you, my lords. I just want to say that I feel sorry for Mr. MacDonald. And the court looked at him and said, why? He won. And Malcolm said today was his debut in the Federal Court of Appeal, and he didn't get to say a word. And at that, the judge smiled. He did smile and said, well, I'm sure he'll have another chance. But it was a lesson on, what, you can litigate as hard as you want against each other, but at the end of the day, you are still colleagues. And that lesson has just stayed with me throughout.
That's a great story. I love it, actually. You're right. That is the camaraderie of the courtroom, isn't it? And that's certainly how it should be. I have to say, we've seen signs of that fraying a little bit in the UK in recent years, but that's another story. So, then, when the history of the firm is written, which it might be, you never know, what would you like it to say about your time as head of the IP team?
It depends on whether you and I are going to write the history.
Well, I think I might.
You know what? I got into management in the early 90s. I was elected department head in the IP group in Ottawa in, I think, 92 or 93. Must have been 92. And again, it was engineered by David Clark, who engineered my career in IP. And started off at that point as department head, and then practice area leader, and so on and so forth. I think, when I look back, I think Gowling WLG IP in Canada and around the world now, but in Canada has, speaking just about Canada at the moment, has an amazing group of professionals, right? Partners and associates and right across Canada, they're great. And I viewed my job as ensuring that they had what they needed to succeed, and then get out of their way, right? So if part of the issue is resources, help with resources. If part of the issue is with automation, help with automation. But at the end of the day, I'm fortunate to have worked with an amazing team, and my job was to just make sure that they had what they needed to succeed. And I hope I did that. I did that well.
Well, the key is what they would say, and I talk to them, and they do say something along those lines. So I think it's a success. Right. Well, you've now handed over the reins of the Canada team leadership role to Sheila Carnegie, who you've worked with her for many years. If you had a single piece of advice for her, what would it be?
One of the most important lessons, actually, I'm going to give you two lessons that I have learned over the years, is first of all, you've got to know your partners, your colleagues, everybody in the IP group. And that means before COVID, obviously, it meant you do a lot of travel. You go to offices, you sit down, you listen, you understand what the issues are that may be causing them problems in that locale, and you help them try and find solutions. And there's no substitute for the time spent listening to people, talking to people. The second thing that's equally important is you've got to make a decision. You can't, at some point in every process, you will gather your information, you will assess it, but you've got to make a decision, and then you've got to move forward based on that decision. And so you've got to have the confidence to do that. And you want your colleagues to be able to say, look, I may not agree with the decision, but he listened, she listened, and heard us out. And so, the classic, I didn't vote for this, but I'll get in line behind it and see it forward. And I think that's equally important.
That's great. Well, that takes us part of the way through your remarkable story, but there's a lot more to come. So thank you for joining for this session. We will be returning soon with the second part, in which we will look at the long relationship between Gowlings in Canada and the firm originally known as Rag & Co in the UK, and how ultimately that came to fruition in the merger of 2016. But for today, thank you, Rob. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you very much, Gordon. It's been a pleasure talking with you.